All right, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Richard Reitsma. I used to be chair of modern languages. I'm not sure modern languages anymore. But I am the faculty associate dean of inclusion and engagement and founder and director of Borders and Migrations, of which this is the second event. Which this is the second event. Okay. Camera, yeah. So welcome to our second event for Borders and Migrations. There's a flyer going around that has the remaining two of the events. One's October 26th. I should know this, shouldn't I? I think it's October 26th and then November 15th. Okay. Yeah. So the October 26th event is going to be hybrid because all of our guests are joining us from Poland. They're going to talk about the Polish and Ukrainian refugee situation. It will be in English. There may be some translation happening there. And then the November event, we're going to do a screening of the film Flee, and we're going to have the film's art director join us from Copenhagen. So that will also be a hybrid event, also in English. Okay. I want to thank the Department of Modern Languages, Literature, and Cultures, the library for always graciously hosting us and providing some snacks, which are in the back. The Department of Political Science and the Program of International Relations, ULLC, Urban Leadership Learning Collaborative, Community, I should know this.
Get it.
Sorry. Sorry, Benny. The Honors Program, Fine Arts, Art History, Campus Ministry, and the BPAA. So, and to Dan Drew, who's always our technical person here in the back, not saying anything. And I want to say thanks to Sarah and Christy, who are my, well, a current SEEP student and a former SEEP, well, kind of a SEEP student still. You're still a SEEP student, kind of a SEEP student.
Whatever.
Who do all my posters and the tech stuff. And if you were here at our last event, we had some technical challenges, but I think this time we'll be okay. So we're good. All right. So I want to introduce you to John Paul Brammer, who is an author and illustrator from rural Oklahoma. Yeah,
exotic, yeah.
It's exotic. It's twice in his backyard. Actual buffalo.
Actual buffalo, yes.
So his first book, Hola Papi, is based on his popular advice column of the same name and was released in June 2021. He was twice named as Editor's Choice in the New York Times Book Review and was selected as a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. And in 2022, Brammer was named the recipient of the Betty Burzone Emerging Writer Award. One of us was a judge on that award.
Thank you.
He is currently a contributing columnist to the Washington Post, where his illustrations and words regularly appear. He is working on his second book and with production company Funny or Die to develop Hola Papi for television, which is why he spends half his time in New York and half his time in LA, and he doesn't like LA very much anymore.
I don't.
So with that, please welcome JP Brammer.
Thank you so much for being here in this room today, and of course to the millions of viewers online. Hello. I'm really excited to be here. I love every time I get to go to a university or a college because I do not remember my college years at all, not because I was partying or having a good time. I was just sort of like a non-person, you know? I think that like Dynamite by Tal Cruz was playing, that's all I remember. It was just like kind of a blur to me. So I'm very excited to be here, and given the subject matter of the class, I thought it would be great to read a little bit from my chapter in the book about the time when I was seeking to be a real Mexican. So I started working at a tortilla factory, much to my abuelita's chagrin. She did not want me doing that. She thought it was something that was supposed to be beneath us. She was from Chihuahua, and she came to the United States with this whole idea of, okay, I'm going to build a better life for my family. They're all going to have fancy jobs. They're all going to have all the things that I didn't have in life. And here I am sort of missing the fact that I don't speak Spanish, wanting to connect with my culture more because we were in rural Oklahoma. We had more cows than people around us. So it wasn't even that my neighbors weren't Mexican. My neighbors weren't people. We were just sort of out in the middle of nowhere. So I had this urge to relearn the things that I had a feeling that we'd lost, and she didn't look very kindly on that. And if you haven't read this book, I have a lot of lore to catch you up on for you to understand what I'm about to say. So I run an advice column called Hola Papi that did start on Grindr. I'm maybe one of the few people who have built my career off Grindr, which I'm very happy about. It was at the time for an outlet called Into. So Grindr was dabbling into the Playboy route of having a magazine and having like a media outlet, like the I'm just here for the articles type thing. And they needed an advice columnist. And I was living paycheck to paycheck in Brooklyn, New York. I was thinking to myself, okay, I need to come up with a way that I can write something weekly, but I'm really tired and I don't have the intelligence to find something new to write about every week. So what if I have people come to me with what I'm going to write about, which is how I fell into the advice column role. It was kind of out of laziness. I wasn't really qualified in any way to give anyone advice. And I thought that I would turn it into a parody of an advice column. So the joke is like, what if Dear Abby was a gay Mexican man? That was like the whole thing for me. And I was supposed to just make fun of advice columns every week. I was supposed to just like, someone would come in with a problem and I would instead just start talking about how great I was, or just start talking about like, oh, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. And I would just say whatever I wanted to say. But the problem is Grindr would distribute this column to a big portion of the gay world. So it was going out in India, it was going out in China, it was going out in Europe, it was going out in Latin America, places that I had never even been before. And it turns out, believe it or not, there are a lot of lonely people on dating apps who are seeking connection with someone else. So it turns out that my inbox quickly became flooded with very heartfelt, very sincere issues like, hey, I'm really into this guy at my job. I think we're kind of flirting. Should I approach him? But also it's illegal to be gay in my country and I might be put to death. I was like, yeah, so you can't make your little jokey jokes. You know what I mean? You can't just be like, oh yeah, sucks to be you, but here's me. So I started having to take my role a little bit more seriously. And so that to this day is the recipe for an Hola Papi column. It's a little bit funny. It's a little bit playing with the format and the fourth wall, but it's heartfelt. It's trying to actually have a conversation with someone. I still don't really give anyone like break up with him, sis kind of advice. I still try to just talk to them and hopefully supply language to them to maybe better understand, you know, where they are in life, how they can sort of approach their problem from a different angle. That all led to this book, Hola Papi, where I wanted to do something similar and play with format, play with a memoir meets an advice column, meets an essay collection. So each chapter in this book is formatted like a letter to someone. And this one is about not feeling Mexican enough, not feeling Latino enough. And it's titled How to Be a Real Mexican. And so each chapter has a sign off. This one is Panicked Hispanic. So if you hear me say panicked, that is someone's name. It doesn't come out of nowhere. So all that out of the way. At this point in my life, I was with my coworkers and they were teaching me Spanish. We had an exchange program kind of where they would teach me curse words in Spanish and I would teach them curse words in English. And we would just sort of like, there are like dozens of ways to say penis in every language. It is truly remarkable. That was like their favorite thing. They were just, I taught them prick and they loved that. They would say prick because I rolled my R. I was still like in Spanish mode when I taught them that word. And so we would just pass it around like hot potato every day, like, hey, prick. Like it was a lot of fun. So here's How to Be a Real Mexican, part of it anyway. The things I wanted for myself, the things I thought would make me real, Mexican last name, Mexican customs and traditions and language. These were things that made Javier's life harder in ways I had never known. Jesse's flippantly telling me to work in construction was mean, but it had no power over me. It existed only on the plane of rhetoric where the two of us were on an even playing field. It wouldn't hold me back, and so it bounced right off of me. But it stuck for Javier. It meant something to Javier. Weeks went by, smelling of old salsa and queso as school continued to pick up. I'd become the president of like 4 different clubs, mostly because I'd been the only one to raise my hand. I was the Spanish club president, the president of the National Honor Society, and the editor-in-chief of the yearbook. And yet I hardly did anything because our school was mostly interested in not getting shut down by the government and avoiding hallway stabbings. I started bringing books and homework to the restaurant, and Javier would ask to take a look at them. You should quit, he told me once, leafing through my math book. You really suck at this job. But before I would inevitably quit, I had my final Spanish exam. It took the form of a disgruntled customer whom Rodrigo and Javier giddily pushed me into dealing with. The customer was a short, slim woman in a halter top who wore her sunglasses indoors and had long acrylic nails. She marched her plastic tray up to the register and slammed it down. No English, her, Rodrigo said, grinning ear to ear. Go ahead. Fine, I sighed. I walked up to the counter, ready to face the final boss battle of my video game. The woman looked at me, and although I couldn't see her eyes, I could tell she was ready to behead me. Hola, I said to her, ¿Qué es tu problema? I wasn't exactly sure what she said back, but it sounded like she was methodically cursing out my ancestors one by one, plucking them individually from the branches of my family tree, generation by generation, before arriving at me. I did manage to pick up, however, that she'd wanted chicken tacos instead of beef. Lo siento, I said again and again in my dumb gringo accent. Voy a make tacos nuevos. I heard Rodrigo and Javier busting a gut in the kitchen. Un minuto, por favor. I went back to the kitchen, punched Javier and Rodrigo, which only made them laugh harder, and made the chicken tacos. The woman, meanwhile, was still talking without me there, fighting the very memory of me. I sheepishly returned with her food. I meant to tell her that they were on the house, that they were free. What I actually said, according to Javier's subsequent translation, was freedom tacos. Here, I'd said, freedom tacos. The woman, perhaps so thrown off by this that she perceived it as a power move, accepted the new tacos and went back to her table. Rodrigo and Javier practically jumped on me, applauding me and laughing so hard I thought they might fall over. For a moment, I stopped taking myself so seriously. I had utterly failed. I was having a great time. At last, my final day in the tortilla factory came. I was asked to do the most unpleasant tasks in the restaurant as a farewell gift. I walked into the sticky room where the bladders of soda were kept for the pop machine, and I cleaned the floor. I cleaned the bathrooms and then the tables, but the worst task was carrying a vat of hot grease out to the dumpster. Javier helped me with this, yellow grease lapping up at the lip of the vat as we walked, threatening to spill over with each step. Ten cuidado, Wampa, he told me. I watched the snake god tattooed on his arm. It wriggled as it strained, its body covered in feathers, ancient and fierce. It was my second favorite tattoo of his. The other was the enormous Our Lady of Guadalupe he had on his back. She'd made a less than miraculous appearance once in the kitchen when Sal had accused Javier of being a dirty bastard, and Javier had lifted up his shirt, turned around and said, "Say it to her." I was thinking how funny it was that these two competing gods could find a common place on Javier's body when my foot caught on a crack in the concrete. I stumbled a little, enough to spill some hot grease on Javier's arm. "Shit," he shouted. We quickly set the vat down and retreated into the shade of the building, where we sat in the grass, Javier hissing into his arm, my heart racing a mile a minute as I said, over and over, the one phrase I could rely on, lo siento, lo siento. Lo siento, I still say that to Abuela sometimes in my head, hoping it will reach her wherever she is, be it heaven or hell or somewhere else. It's probably hell. I feel I want to apologize to her, like I apologize to Javier for using her pain to validate my identity. I used to resent the fact that she didn't teach me Spanish, that she didn't maintain our family traditions. I've come to understand that her decision to ditch those things were more quote-unquote authentically Mexican than performing any of the rituals I thought of as real. Listening to reggaeton, making tacos, caring about a flag. Lo siento. I didn't realize how intrinsically American it was of me to think that I could have an identity by having things, Spanish, tattoos, silver chains, scars. If I could do it again, panicked, I would tell myself that identity is defined as much by what you have as it is by what you've lost. Wanting to recover those things was like feeling homesick for a home that I never had. That, to me, is Chicano. Lo siento. I've come to understand, panicked, that race is a lie, but it's a lie like money is a lie, which means it's real because it's a system. You can't really opt out of it. You have to play along with it to some degree, which I realized was the source of my youthful anger. I went from being American, unencumbered by identity, to realizing that I had, in fact, been burdened, tasked with something, and I blamed everyone around me for it. I blamed my authentically Mexican family for putting me in that situation by not preparing me, by not telling me what I was and allowing the world to surprise me with it instead. I blamed myself, too, because who was I, surrounded by all the comforts they had sacrificed to give me, to tell them they were wrong? The answer, I feel, is I'm no one at all except for my experiences. I'm the things I've seen and the things I felt, the people I've met. Those things are authentic. You can't lie your way in or out of them like you can lie your way into a college, like you can lie your way to your white friends about whether or not the Mexican restaurant you're eating at is real, just to feel a temporary surge in authority, in authenticity. All that is to say, panicked, it's not about whether you can make tacos or not. It helps, but it's not about that. This is a system we're concerned with creating experiential differences than it is about whether or not you're really anything. Abuela and Javier taught me that. It's more important that you care about the lives and the pain of the people around you than it is for you to know how to say dick in Spanish. It's more important that you listen rather than speak. Lo siento, I said again, in the shadow of the Rosas building, as if the 100th time would undo what I had done to Javier. Javier sucked his teeth. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a long drag. He exhaled and turned his other arm, the one that hadn't just been burned, to show me. Look, he said, and I saw several scars and grease burns. This must have happened to him plenty of times before. My arms, meanwhile, had never felt so clean and unused. I'm sorry, I said in English. You know what you are, he said, locking eyes with me, his face deathly serious, my heart leaping. What? I asked. A prick, he said. I let out a cackle, relief and joy and sadness. I thought it sounded an awful lot like my abuela's. That is how to be a real Mexican. Thank you. I am very glad years later that I got a chapter out of that experience, because I think it is the hardest job I have ever worked in my entire life. Being a writer is so much easier than making tortillas, making tacos. I didn't have a food license, by the way. I was just sort of winging it. So whenever a order would come in, I would just have to look at it and be like, okay, I think it's weird. Like, you don't know how much cheese goes into a taco when push comes to shove. It's like, there's no industry standard, really. It's all vibes. So I was just so afraid of ruining someone's eating experience every single day. I hope to never work in food service again. Every time I complain to my mom about work, she's like, do you want to make tortillas again? I was like, no, no. We did have, however, a little like not glass, like plexiglass viewing area where the person making tortillas is sort of on display like a zoo animal, and it was often me. So I was just like making the dough and putting it into this machine that pumps them out. And kids could come up and they would just like hold out their hand, and you would give them a little piece of tortilla dough and they would play with it. That part was fun because it felt like dystopian to me. I had my little like I had the guts of the tortilla machine over here, and I'm like sweating, and I'm just like pouring flour and stuff into it, and I'm just like all behind glass. I think if I did this chapter again, I would make a bigger deal out of that than I did, but I was very focused on other things. So yeah, what I was trying to say with this chapter, I think, the tortilla factory is something I come back to a lot when I try to figure out how identity works, and how it doesn't work, I think, is even more important, because I sort of saw it as the locus of authenticity in my little area. So in Oklahoma, rural Oklahoma, where I'm from, the view of what a Mexican is very different, just like it is in any part of the world. You'll see that no one has a consistent view of how identity works across cultures, countries, etc. And where I'm from, Mexicans are the people who make your food, who do the gardening. They're the people over at Home Depot where if you need something done quick and cheap, you go there and you pick them up, etc. And they are most known for the restaurants. So all the Mexican families, there is an interesting story to be told there, where there is an empire of Mexican restaurants in my hometown that is run by one rich Mexican family, and they're sort of like the shit. Like, I remember one of the girls was my classmates, and she was just a princess. Like, oh my God, your dad owns Los Tres. And so every time, Los Tres Amigos, what it was called. Los Tres eventually shut down Rosa's Tortilla Factory and took it over. So it's running out of the corpse of Rosa's right now. So every time I go there, it's like kind of memorable, kind of not. And I just thought she was the most Mexican person to ever live. Like, she spoke Spanish, she could make all the food, everyone loved her. Every time we had a big event, she'd be like, oh my gosh, yes, you can just have that Los Tres, my dad will totally host it. And so we had a lot of like pre-parties there for homecoming and stuff. Which is to say that in our town, obviously, it all sort of depended on how other people thought of you. If you were Mexican, you were sort of like, oh, okay, your family does labor, unless you own Los Tres, in which case you were just like the queen of Lawton, Oklahoma. And so for me, I thought, okay, if I'm going to be a real Mexican, I need to learn Spanish. I need to learn how to make our food. My mother cannot cook to save her life. She microwaved an egg one time. It was very scary for me. I know that every time she says she's going to cook, everyone in my family's like, oh Lord, she's starting. She is kind of proud of it most days. I think that this idea of transcending the womanly Mexican duties of like, oh, I take care of the house, I cook, etc., is something that she's very happy to not do. However, at this time in my life, when I looked around and I saw that I didn't quite fit in the way I wanted to, partially because my dad's family pieced out very quickly when I was young. They claim they didn't like that my mom was Catholic, but my mom and my whole Mexican family, unlike me, they are dark-skinned, very short, very visibly non-white. My grandparents especially had a really difficult time in rural Oklahoma, and my dad's family was just like, no, we don't want anything to do with that. So I think displacing that anger that I had towards my dad's family onto myself was part of why I went to the Mexican tortilla factory, because I thought, I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want to be like his family. They suck. I want to be Mexican. I was raised around Mexicans. We were always in Texas. We were always going to the Mexican bakeries. My abuela spoke Spanish all the time. They just didn't want to teach it to me because my abuela dropped out of elementary school because she couldn't speak English, and she picked fruit. And her whole deal was just like, I don't want you to do that. Which is kind of why me working at the tortilla factory was so horrific to her. I think if I had worked at Burger King, she would have been fine, you know. I think that, like, or if I had done something, anything but making tortillas for a living, because she was just like, mijo, no. But I think what the tortilla factory taught me once I got there is just how fragile the entire project of ethnicity and culture and race is, because I was there, and I remember my first day, I was greeted like, hey, paisano, like, you know, countryman, you're also Mexican, we're Mexican, you're Mexican. And, you know, I'm not from Mexico. They were actually all undocumented. And so they kind of treated me like we had something to do with each other, when in fact we didn't necessarily. It was an interesting dance to be had, because they knew that I didn't speak Spanish. They knew that I wasn't quite eye to eye with the way they lived their lives, but at the same time they knew that I had something to do with them, and they wanted to incorporate me into that project as best as they could. And what I kind of learned is just like, wow, there's actually a million different ways to be Mexican, just like there's a million different ways to be American, a million different ways to be any kind of person, really. I was documented. I didn't have to work to supply money for my family. My mom was doing quite well. She married a pharmaceutical rep, so she was fine. I wasn't like sending tortilla checks to my mom every week to make sure that we had, you know, food on the table. I was just doing it as like a foreign exchange program, really. And so in talking to these people and in realizing what their lives had looked like, the shape that their lives in America had taken, I realized like I don't have that much to do with these people. And yet, because of this notion that, oh no, but we're like culturally originating from the same place in some nebulous way, we were supposed to be in the same caste somehow, when we kind of weren't. So what I found in the tortilla factory wasn't affirmation that, yes, you are Mexican enough. I actually found a lot of questions that troubled my high school thesis on what identity was. I kind of figured out like, yeah, maybe my abuelos were immigrants, and yeah, maybe they did physical labor, and they didn't have any money, and they were poor. And those things can be part of my story, and yet at the same time, it's not my material reality. And so this chapter is me sort of putting material reality ahead of the notion that like, oh yes, just because this is where my family's from, that means this is who I am. I'm kind of saying, no, actually, I encountered some things here that made me rethink that. And I think it was very formative. And so the idea that you can be Mexican enough is a flawed premise. And in the context of this advice column, the advice is sort of like, you know, I think it's more important that you take in the people around you and you listen to their stories, you figure out what they're like, you listen to their pain, because everyone has their own, of course, and it's still valid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to meet some threshold of like, well, here's the exact limit to where everything I need that makes me Mexican enough. Stopping caring about that was really liberating. I kind of was hoping to convey that in this chapter, and also just make a lot of jokes about my grandmother, who was a very crazy person. She, I talk a little bit about in this chapter, she made me watch a lot of telenovelas with her, and her favorite thing to do was just to point at the one she wanted to strangle. She would just be like, oh, mijo, I want to strangle that lady. I hate her so much. Blah, 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 blah. That was like our bonding time. Yeah, she was a trip. My second book has a lot more about her than this one does. But yeah, as an advice columnist, my whole thing is kind of answering questions. So I was kind of hoping I could field some from you. If you have anything to ask me, I would love to just make it a conversation. Yes. So my family, we grew up on a ranch. So my white grandfather, who didn't have much to do with us, was a rancher and a farmer. But my dad was sort of the maverick in his family. He's like, I don't want to be a farmer. I want to sell drugs. You know, like that was this whole thing. So he instead, my grandfather rented out the land to actual ranchers and farmers. So we grew up with like horses and cows and chickens and stuff, but I didn't have to like shovel any animals' poop, you know, like that wasn't part of my narrative. I remember it was weird. Like I was on a farm, but I was such an internet kid. Like I just remember being in like the 7th grade Googling Nessie evidence. And so I was just like constantly on the internet looking at weird forums and like checking in on my favorite animes online. Like I was not doing farm work. It was just not, it was not happening. And nowadays, my mother, who sort of came up as the winner of the big race war between my dad's family and our family, she runs the farm as an aesthetic operation. So she has like mini donkeys that are sort of like glorified dogs. Like they just sort of they're very fluffy. They come up to you, they nibble at your shirt. They just want to be petted and loved. She has chickens that are slowly being picked off one by one by coyotes at the moment. But she's very invested in these chickens. They have whole storylines where the Gertrude, the matriarch, was bullying Pennsatucky, who was this little scrawny chicken. Then Gertrude died, and somehow Pennsatucky became top of the pecking order, and now everyone loves her, and they're all following her. Gertrude was eaten by a coyote. So like every week I call my mom, and my mom's like, you will not believe what the girls are up to. Like we just had this whole conversation. It's a little like Game of Thrones happening in that chicken coop, I think. I'm very invested in it personally. But yeah, it's just like the land, and we don't have much to do with it physically. It just happened to create this like very isolated environment for me, because from our hill, the next house over is very far away. Although the aforementioned Mexican family who created Los Tres just built the ugliest mansion I've ever seen across the street from us, and my mother is seething. She is furious. Like every time I visit, she's like, can you believe how ugly that building is? I'm just like, Mom, you're being mean. So yeah, that was our little environment. We're sort of still out in the middle of nowhere. People are starting to move out there, and my mom has hopes of turning the barn into an Airbnb, and I'm trying to dissuade her from that at the moment. But yeah.
Did you go to college for writing? Did you know you wanted to do like?
Kind of. So the way my family worked, my mom was the first to go to college in the family and get a degree. And so for her, it was extremely important that I went to college. Like I didn't even question it. It wasn't like, you can go to college if you feel like it. It was like college was just after high school, that's what you do. Like you're done, you graduate high school, cool, now you go to college. But I wasn't into it personally. Like I just didn't feel it very much. I did do a young professional writing program, young as in it had just been invented 3 years before I got there. And I don't think I learned a whole lot. I remember the first week of my professional writing course, they gave me a diagram of a horse, and it had all these little arrows pointing to different parts of the horse, well, the names of the horse. And our teacher was like, in case you need to write about horses, like this is what you need. You will now know that this is where the haunches are, for example. And I was like, I'm spending money to be here. This is bad. This is really bad. Yeah, I think I kind of phoned it in at college, but I didn't really have a choice. I went to OU, which is about like an hour, 15-minute drive from where I'm from. And I was one of those kids who like took every opportunity to go back home, because the high school I went to, and I kind of alluded to it here, was rough. It was like, we didn't have enough books, we didn't have enough desks, we had a lot of gang violence, we had metal detectors, etc. And then to go from that to the frat land that is OU, where everyone is like a rich kid from Texas, was just so jarring to me. And I felt like such a fish out of water. And I just felt quite frustrated every single week, because a lot of the activities that they had us do, you can't just take someone out of like the movie Stand and Deliver and pop them into this like preppy, like, you know what I mean, school, and then be like, okay, I'll do a little dance and we're gonna film it and it's gonna be fun. And you know, it's like, ugh, I hated it. I was very bitter about it, but I got through it. I did. And I did graduate with a professional writing degree, which ostensibly I am using. You know, I wrote a book. So who am I to tell them that they were doing it wrong? I guess it was fine. I know we have a bulletin board for all our successful alumni of the professional writing program. And if I'm not on that bulletin board, when I get back to that school, they are going to hear about it. They are going to hear about it. It will be a whole thing because my first writing teacher really believed in me, and he told the next writing teacher I had, like, oh, he's really good. And this one hated me and had a meeting with me where she was like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Professor Blevins said that you were the best in his class, and I'm just not seeing that. And just like really. So I am going, when I go back to the University of Oklahoma, specifically the Gaylord College of Journalism, where they have the professional writing program, Professor Chester is going to get it from me. And that's my college experience, I think. It's all revenge. It's all just revenge. Yeah, I can't wait.
So do you know Spanish now?
So I have a very patient tutor. Yes, so unfortunately I have to learn Spanish to make the second book happen. My second book is sort of about a journey of language. And I thought it would be great for me to become fluent in Spanish while I'm writing this book, because it is sort of about trying to find yourself in another language and how you approach language, all the expectations of identity, and what you find more often than not is something else entirely, something that has nothing to do with you. So when I was little, because so few people in my environment spoke Spanish, I considered Spanish to be this like sacred thing that my abuelos spoke and I didn't. So anytime they had to like chat with each other outside of us hearing, they would say it. So I had my personal relationship with the language. And then you grow up and you realize, oh wait, of course, a huge number of people in the world speak Spanish. It's no big deal. Like, it's a language. So I decided to take it more seriously, because I do have family in Mexico that I visit sometimes, and it's very awkward because I'm just like in the kitchen and they're just like talking back and forth, and then I just have to be like, hola, sí, claro. Like, you know, it's just like, it's nasty. So my tutor is Colombian. I love him to death. He is giving me increasingly depressing writing assignments of like Latin American women poets who have all almost uniformly committed suicide in some crazy way, where like one just like walked into the sea and she was like, this is a great poem. And I read it and I look into it and I'm just like, are you okay? Like, do you want to talk about something? But yeah, I'm pretty good at the moment. I'm very fluent with reading and I'm very fluent with writing. When it comes to speaking, I'm told that English lives back here and Spanish lives up by the teeth, and I'm having trouble sort of committing to that because I'm so thoroughly an English speaker. My mom was my 9th grade English teacher. We love English. We're Mexican people who love English. So it is very hard for me, but I hope to be perfectly fluent within the next year. And if I'm not, he's getting fired.
I was wondering, so like throughout the book, you kind of talk about times post grad where you have certain jobs that you didn't like, or like in between jobs and stuff like that. And like, as someone who wants to be a writer and journalism major, like, was there ever a time where you thought about doing something else, or just like completely stopping writing because it wasn't working out?
Oh yeah, I know the exact moment I thought I should stop writing. It was, so I was doing a bunch of jobs at once. One was this column. I was doing reporting for NBC News, and they only gave me like the really sad grunt gay work to do at NBC News. So, which at that time was primarily Chechnya. So I remember I had stayed up till like 3 a.m. to talk to like Svetlana or whoever who was in Russia, and talking to me in hushed tones about what was going on in Chechnya, and I could barely understand her. And I was like trying to write it all down. I'm just like, what are you saying? I don't know. And then I had to get up early the next morning, get on the train to 30 Rock. I was also doing puff pieces for Teen Vogue at the time. So I was writing on my phone about how Kylie Jenner had matched her fidget spinner with her dress. And I was like, I'm going to jump off the building. This is it. Like, my eyes were like bloodshot. I'm writing this thing on my phone, like tears streaming down my face. Like, OMG, she slayed. Like, it was just like, I was like, my abuela did not pick fruit in this country for this. Like, I have got to do something else. You know, I stuck with it. I persevered. But it was very difficult. I also like how delicately you put that, because if you read the book, you know that one of my jobs was recapping gay porn, which was illuminating. Very illuminating. It was also a lot of writing until you get to a certain point is just straight up humiliating, you know, where it's just like, okay, yeah, I could maybe write something about Kylie Jenner. I could maybe write something about Dua Lipa, who actually my transition from like hating writing to loving writing had to do with Dua Lipa, because they, for some reason, after phoning in all these puff pieces, Teen Vogue was like, do you want to interview Dua Lipa and do our big cover story about it? And I was like, yeah, I do want to do that. This was, you know, pre future nostalgia. And I wrote that, and it actually got a whole bunch of new opportunities in journalism for me, and I was able to just use that as a very necessary. Sometimes you're stuck on the climbing wall and your foot can't find the next little notch, and eventually you find one, you're like, okay, good, I can keep going. And I found that one at the exact right moment, because I was like, I should, can I be a consultant? Can I, like, I don't know, go to one of those fake jobs where I'm just doing like advertising, but it's just, you know, nebulously defined and I get a salary for that? I was looking into it for sure. But yeah, Hola Papi also kind of started blowing up, and I was like, oh my God, I found my train, thank God. Because oftentimes as a writer, you are just waiting for that train to make it stop by you, like, okay, I found my thing, I can use this to get me to the next thing. And that was Hola Papi for me. This is my favorite child. He went to school, he made all A's, he's going to take care of me in old age. Very, very proud of him. Yeah, and that's how I feel about being a writer.
You speak a lot about your identity as a Mexican and problems with that. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your identity and how that intersects with you.
Yeah, so in fact, when I look back on just how angry I was my senior year in high school that led me to work at the tortilla factory in the first place, probably a lot of that was just misplaced anger at being gay, low-key, and just like not willing to confront it. Because, you know, I did grow up in a very affirming and accepting household. My mom practically raised a gay son on purpose. Like one of the first books that she put in my hands when I was old enough to read was Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris. She was like, oh, you should read this, it's fabulous, like that kind of thing. I had no idea what was going on in that book, but I was reading it. She also gave me like a bunch of art books to read. I read a lot of the depressing stories about, you know, Van Gogh, etc. She had me read Factory Girl. Like she was just like, also in my high school, she found all the gay people who were in the school, and like they just gravitated her. She was the magnet, and like they were her little minions. They would go get her lunch, and they would just like gossip, and they would like talk over the intercom to each other sometimes. We'd be like, Miss Brammer, hey, and like, oh hey Jonathan, like that kind of thing. So it wasn't like a home thing. It was more like in the area where I'm from, very cowboyish type area. It was just like it wasn't on the table. You just don't do it, and especially in middle school. I remember one time one of my classmates called his own outfits cute, and he was bullied so badly for that he had to transfer. It's like there was just that much like policing going on, surveillance. Like you could not just express yourself that way. And that was a message I really took to heart. As a person who also just has really bad anxiety, and I was really afraid of doing the wrong thing, I was like, okay, I don't want any trouble. I'm just going to be heterosexual. We'll be fine. And like, I talk in this book about having a girlfriend and how odd that was, and how having a girlfriend actually like we had a wonderful relationship. I just remember like staying up till 2 a.m. talking to her on the phone. I'm playing Halo and she was just like talking, and it was just like lovely. We had the whole like YA graphic novel experience together. It just so happened to be that, you know, I was a homosexual and wasn't willing to admit it at the time. But yeah, being gay for me, it's kind of weird that in my hometown, now I'm just the gay person, right? Like not only am I gay, I'm the gay. Like I have monetized it. I have gotten notoriety from it. I did my first event in my hometown last summer, which was very funny because they actually hired security for it. And there was like a police officer there, and I went up to him and I was just like, hey, what's up? And he was like, I'm just trying to make $1, brother. This was like, I was like, you are not jumping in front of a bullet for me. I'm gonna die. Not good. But yeah, I think at this point in my life, what's so strange is that I'm so used to just being myself that I don't think about it very often. Like I went to a writers event in Miami not too long ago, and it was like a party, and I got there and I was like, oh my God, straight people write books too. I forgot. Like I was just so used to like being with my little group of people, and we don't, talk about being gay all day. We just talk about whatever is on our minds. And so I forget that outside of Brooklyn, outside of this weird little creative life I have set up for myself, that it's not always easy. So going back home was actually pretty nice because I met all these people who in my hometown had set up clubs, organizations, they were pushing for legislation. And I was like, you guys are doing 10 times more than I'm doing for the cause. Like, I don't know. I'm not in rural Oklahoma trying to get people to attend a Pride event. Like that would be really scary for me, in fact. So it's something that affects me every day for sure, in as much as it's the water I swim in. I'm a gay little fish. Like, it's just something I don't think about too terribly often. But what I like about it is, I think even before I came out, it gave me the perspective of looking at things a little bit from the outside. So it really helped with my observations of things, because when I'm like trying to dress as a straight boy in middle school or high school, that actually taught me a lot about how presentation works, how using appearances or using clothing or using affects and behavior can lead to a certain outcome, how people are actually constantly putting up a performance or a facade of sorts, trying to move through the world as best as they can with the best effects that they can. And, it's not always perfect, but you do it. Like for me, being a straight kid was a concerted effort. I had to really go out of my way and find these like tap out shirts. It was hard, it was effortful. And that effort taught me a lot of things, and being able to see like masculinity, sexuality, gender, etc., kind of standing outside of it a little bit, I think really helped me as a writer. But nowadays I'm a little out of touch. I am. Everyone's gay to me now.
Why and when did you move to Buffalo?
So I was in DC first. I went there for a year and a half. This is where my writing career started, because this very strange man hit me up on Twitter in my DMs like, hey, do you want to move up to DC and work on my startup? And I was like, yeah, I really want to do that. I was in classes to learn how to teach English in Thailand or something, and my heart was not in it because I was like, oh my God. My mom taught English and I saw how hard that was. I don't know if I'm ready to, have children in my room. So luckily this man came out of nowhere and was like, I want to move you up to DC. And I was, of course, in a place in my life where I'm crazy. So I'm just like, yeah, let's do it. So I move up there, and it was very weird. It was like that era of blogging in 2014 where everything was just like in one tweet, she destroys so-and-so, or like Nancy Pelosi just slayed the house down boots with this tweet. Like it was just very that, you know what I mean? And I was writing them. So I'm glad that website's dead and buried. You will never find it. You'll never find a single byline that I wrote. If you did, then it would probably provide great leverage against me, because I was just writing god-awful, clickbaity, like vague Democrat Party like messaging of like, wow, isn't it a slay when we pass this bill? It was just horrible. But I did it. Now I wasn't a very DC person, I will say. I think the most psychotic gay people in the world live in DC. They're all just like the type A smartest people in the room, like raise their hand all the time. They're just all together in one city. It's not stable. So that blogging enterprise fell apart because the CEO was Australian but living in the US and giving money into US politics, which is illegal. So one day we just showed up, we're like, where's Ian? He had fled the country. Then my boss was usurped. What's funny is how people will just create little power dynamics in these like stakeless enterprises where it's just like, oh my God, I'm going to jockey for power within this blogging site. And so like they successfully deposed him, which I was fine about because he was like a creepy person. But then the person who deposed him got deposed. And then I was the most senior employee at age 24. So when this company came in to buy our website, they were like, we need to speak to who's in charge around here. And I was like, it's me. I'm the last one left. It was like me, this 23-year-old graphic designer, and the person who arranged all the meetings for people. And we were the last ones left. And so they were like, okay, do you want to move to New York? We're going to buy your website. We'd love to keep you. Your numbers are good and you're very inexpensive. I was like, yeah, two of my best traits, I would say. So they moved me up to New York, and that's just sort of what I did because I felt I had to keep, a salary. And then they fired me 2 weeks later for my lack of passion. which is when I started freelancing, which led me here. Like, it was during that freelancing era that I started Hola Papi. So it was a blessing in disguise. I did do a really good job in that office of forcing myself to cry. Like, I moved my life here. Like, it was just like for a severance, you know. And they gave me a nice severance that allowed me to live off of it for a little bit. And that's why I'm still in New York. Like, I didn't choose New York. I wasn't like dreaming of the big city one day in rural Oklahoma. I was like, I'll just go wherever. I don't know. Whoever will have me, I'll go there. And now it's been like 7 years and I'm still there. I just haven't thought about it until now. Yeah, that's it.
You started in answer to an earlier question to talk about some of the things you read when you were younger.
Mm.
Expand on that. First, did it influence you? Drivers did it influence you?
Yeah, so I was an absolute sponge as a kid because most of the libraries I was in were not very expansive. It's just like whatever filtered down to the seabed of Cache, Oklahoma is sort of what I read. And that took the form of a lot of weird books. There's this one book, I don't know if you've read, called Door into Ocean, that I still think has impacted me quite a bit. So it is about a planet of lesbian catfish people. And they're under attack by this like planet of men. And the lesbian catfish people have to fight back, but they're going to fight back with their kindness. And I read that and I was like, whoa, books are weird. I remember I was on like this LGBT writers panel where they asked me like, when did you first see yourself in a book? And I had to describe the lesbian catfish people in detail because that was when I read, I was like, oh, you can just make up whatever the hell you want in a book and no one's going to stop you. That was huge to me. I don't know what that book was doing in a Catholic elementary school, but there it was. I was like between Hank the Cowdog, you know, I was just like taking breaks and reading stuff like that. I also read a lot of books about animals. I remember, this is at the time, by the way, where like you can take quizzes about books and win points and exchange those points for personal pan pizzas. So what I would do, because I watched so much Animal Planet and I knew so much about animals, I would skim through a book about an animal, take the reading quiz on that, get 5 points for it, and I got a lot of pizza out of that. I was gaming the system as a child. Obviously, I was forced to read a lot of biblical stories, which probably impacted me more than I'm willing to admit. A lot of weird stuff happens in the Bible. A lot of fantastic stuff happens in the Bible. And it's cool in a way because it's so epic. It's on such a grand scale and it asks so much of your imagination, the beasts that it asks you to conjure in your head, like manna falling from the sky, there's fire being summoned, there's lightning, there's thunder, there's all this other stuff. And so creating that like opera house in my brain in Catholic school, I think really helped me in terms of, it was literature and it was that really made me think like, oh, you can imagine whatever you want. You can just do whatever you want. You can bring it into material reality even somehow. So that was very important. But I was also reading a lot of like regular kid stuff too. There's this one author, Peg Carrot, who I think is so iconic. She just wrote about like, it's a lot of books about kids deceiving their kidnappers and, you know, like turning in the serial killer at the zoo because like they were locked in the zoo overnight and the serial killer's there and they have to trick him into the gorilla enclosure, like stuff like that. And then out of nowhere, she drops this book about having polio out of nowhere. And it was the most harrowing thing I'd ever read in my life. And then she just went back to like, those rascally kids sure did trick that murderer. It was very weird. I was like, are you all right? Like, what's going on? But yeah, I read anything I could get my hands on. In fact, I wish I was the same reader now that I was back then, because now I have like YouTube and I just like am on the internet a lot and I read whatever article floats past my visage or whatever. But back then I was just like, if it's got pages, it's a bound book, I can pick it up, I will read it. So it was very indiscriminate, I would say.
Well, thank you, JP, for having a conversation with us. So
thank you for having me. Thank you so much. If you want. if you feel like it. I am JP Brammer on everything. I'm not very fun on Instagram. I am too much fun on Twitter. I apologize for the tweets. That's my last statement. Yeah. That's all I have left to say.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Grab a lemon bar. Bye, everyone.